Review copy provided by Adult Swim Games. Oh my god, this game is hard. This is Death Gambit, a tough, challenging, and absolutely brutal action RPG. It's made by White Rabbit and it's the studio's first game together, but had you not been told that, I think outside of a few bugs, this game could have easily fooled anybody. Death Gambit is available now for PC and PS4 for $20. Death Gambit starts off on a super peppy note. You died. Okay, maybe not so happy. Anyway, you find yourself waking up in Alamilla, a medieval land decimated by war. Only a few minutes ago you were slain in a battle and now you find yourself resurrected by death. Death promises our protagonist immortality if he's able to go and eliminate the rest of the immortals roaming across the world. You're essentially a bounty hunter for death, doing their dirty work in exchange for your life. Throughout the game you come to learn more about the protagonist's past, who they were as a child, what they were fighting for, and what led them to this fateful battle that ended in their death. This is all told through flashbacks that happen every once in a while with an in-game death. That's not to say that you have to die to keep the story progressing. Natural story points will reveal themselves as you beat certain bosses and continue on with the game. The flashbacks more or less give extra details of the character you're playing as and their past. Themes of morality and death are constantly challenged and brought up throughout the story. While I found the lore to be fascinating, I wasn't too impressed with the narrative overall. It seemed vague and scattered throughout the many vignettes you'd get with every death. Ultimately, it ended up being just okay, serving as a backdrop for the bigger focus being the gameplay. At its core, Death Gambit is an action combat RPG. The developers themselves describe it as a 2D Souls game, and I think that's a fair diagnosis of this game. Diving into the world, you're able to choose between the 7 different classes of characters. They consist of Soldier, Assassin, Blood Knight, Wizard, Noble, Sentinel, and Death. Each class has their own battle style that completely alters the types of attacks you can perform, and thus how the combat feels. It also acts as a great incentive to go back and replay the game once you've completed the campaign. While the bosses will remain the same, the strategies of fighting bosses completely changes with the tools at your disposal. Playing the game with primarily an axe and melee combat feels completely different than playing the game as a magic caster that relies on projectiles. Speaking of combat, it's incredibly simple to get into. Throughout the game you can equip up to 2 different weapons at once. These have basic attack swings that can be altered slightly when you attack in the air or dodge roll prior to attacking. Up to 3 different abilities can be equipped as well, and these act as skills that can then be used in combination with your weapons. Both weapons and abilities have requirements that need to be fulfilled before being able to use them. For example, one ability may need a specific type of weapon to be equipped first, or a certain level stat to be reached. That's where the RPG mechanics come into play. As you defeat enemies and bosses, you'll earn points that can then be reinvested into your character, leveling up individual stats. On top of the stats, there's a skill tree that can unlock new types of attributes as well. These are unlocked using soul energy from defeated enemies. The skill tree itself is shared across all the different types of character classes except one specific skill line made for each class. In combat sections against enemies and bosses, gameplay ends up being a game of analyzation and execution. Each enemy fights differently, especially the boss battles that can come in different phases. It's up to you to analyze the movement and attack patterns of these enemies and then think of the right way to defeat them. Ultimately, it ends up being a game of the correct spacing, blocks, and dodge rolls. Obviously, each of the bosses can be defeated by the different types of character classes and their weapons, but it's how you use those different weapons in combination with your movement that ultimately defeats the boss. That's not to dismay anyone into thinking this sounds easy, because it certainly isn't. It's a brutal game that had me constantly dying over and over again. I constantly found myself over my head tackling bosses straight on, only to get my butt kicked. I would then go explore the non-linear area around me looking for enemies to fight, items to help me on my journey, then return back and fight the boss battle again. The progression of the game was demanding but certainly rewarding at the same time. Tackling and beating a boss after my 15th try was also satisfying. Over the 8 to 12 hour campaign that completely varies on your own personal skills and which paths you take on your boss rush adventure, I found myself yelling and screaming but enjoying the gameplay. After completing the game, you do unlock a new Game Plus mode that changes up the placements of bosses while also increasing their difficulty. There's even something called Heroic Boss Rematch that lets you immediately re-challenge a boss after beating them once. They return more powerful than before with new moves that make the fights even more challenging than before. As someone that had enough trouble beating the base game alone, New Game Plus was a nightmare, in a good way. I'm enthralled by the animation in Death Gambit. The entire game is designed around this pixel art style that looks stunning thanks to the attention to detail of the animation. Waterfalls fall down the background, plants sway along to the wind, and even raindrops fall from the sky and react to the ground. There's so much happening on screen at once, yet it's so subtle that it blends in perfectly. I absolutely love that. The world just feels so lived in. Things aren't flawless though. I played primarily on PC, and despite the game not being so graphically intensive, I ran into some weird frame pacing issues. While it did perform at a near stable 60 frames per second, I noticed that there'd be frequent 1 to 3 frame drop dips that introduced a bit of screen tearing and little hiccups. It happened most while traversing from one section of the game to another rather than in the middle of a boss fight where the performance mattered the most. It's a minor thing, but something that should be noted since it's likely a game bug rather than the game being too graphically intensive for my PC. I also wanted to note that my buddy John at SpawnWaveMedia, who's playing the PS4 version of this game, found a bug that got the game to crash on one specific death screen. So it does seem like there are bugs in both versions of the game at the moment.
This contract will resurrect you in service to me. Rest assured, your mind and actions will be your own.
When I first started Death Gambit, I literally stayed at the title screen for about 3 minutes just listening to the music because damn was it good. The music in the boss battles and the world exploration was just catchy and definitely kept me from muting the game and listening to my own music on Spotify. Death Gambit also features voice acting, and while the performances are decent, I don't think they were designed that well. You see, when you have a moment when someone is speaking, it's incredibly silent in the scene outside of that voice, and it can make the conversations feel off-putting. The protagonist, for example, is completely mute, which I think is a bad design choice. Why have everyone else speak verbally and then not have the protagonist speak despite them having full-on sentence dialogue text? That makes a lot of sense when I'm the one designing the way the character looks at the beginning of the game, but not in this case. It made me want to stop paying attention to the other character's voice dialogue and just read it at my own pace and click next. Death Gambit's story wasn't the most impressionable around. It had a decent lore setup, but outside of that, it didn't really capture me with its writing. Despite that, its gameplay was simple to understand, but incredibly challenging. It left me with moments of yelling that ultimately ended with a sense of satisfaction every time I was finally able to take down a boss. Its progression system and how it ties in with the abilities and weapons was great, with plenty of incentive to go back and replay the game through the New Game Plus, the different classes, or the boss rematches. Sadly, there are some bugs here and there with both the PS4 and the PC version, but none that completely ruined the gameplay for me, at least on the PC version. If you only own a PS4, then perhaps hold off for a patch so that it doesn't crash anymore. However, look past those technical hiccups on PC and the mediocre narrative, and you still have a satisfactory action RPG with rewarding combat. If I had to give it a score, I'd give Death Gambit a 7.5 out of 10. That does it for my review of Death Gambit for the PC and PS4. If you enjoyed the video, then please be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more reviews just like this every single week, and you can check out my most recent videos on the left side of the screen. Thank you all very much for watching, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next one.